Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from MBS. It's focusing on the MBS Sustainable Futures Report, which was recently launched. Just a few housekeeping rules before we begin. All attendees' microphones are muted, just so we don't have any issues with the sound through the presentation. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A section, and we will follow these up after the webinar. We do like to respond to all queries, so if you have got those, drop us a note and we'll respond to you afterwards. If there's anything that you'd like to know more about, particularly about what you've heard today or about MBS, you can visit thembs.com or email us at info@thembs.com. Your speakers today are myself. My name's Lee Jones. I'm the head of manufacturer solutions at MBS. I'm also the acting head of sustainability for MBS's parent group, Byggfakta. Joining me is my colleague Jenny Archer. Jenny's the senior researcher at MBS and was fundamental in developing and conducting the actual survey itself that produced the report. Jenny's going to give you an overview of that after myself. And then once we've gone through the presentation, we're going to open up to a panel discussion, and kindly joining us today are Jade Lewis, who's the CEO of the Sustainable Energy Association, and Tilleen Josephson, who's architect and the Thrive project leader at Chetwood Architects. Just a little bit about who MBS are for anybody that doesn't know. MBS are part of the Byggfakta Group. Alongside our sister company, Glenigan, we represent most of the construction sector in the UK, and Byggfakta itself operates internationally with many businesses that are similar to MBS and Glenigan around the world. MBS itself has been established for well over 5 decades. It was originally started to structure specification in the UK because prior to that there was no standard way of specifications being conducted. Today, through our cloud-based technology platforms, we connect specifiers and manufacturers to aid their decision making throughout the project timeline. Quick overview of the Mbs Platforms. We provide RIBACPD.com. We have our platform Mbs Source, which is an online product search engine where you can search for thousands of manufacturers and hundreds of thousands of construction products. And this all links into Mbs Chorus, which is our cloud-based specification tool. So what we're going to cover today on the webinar itself is I'm going to give a little bit of an overview as to what the rationale was behind the Sustainable Futures Report. So effectively, why was it needed? Why did we feel we had to do this? And then my colleague Jenny's going to give you an overview of the report findings itself. And then we'll open up to the panel to discuss the topics that are surrounding the findings there. We'll talk about some future considerations, and then I'll provide a wrap-up and summary with some of the key takeaways at the end. So the rationale, why did we do this? Well, you can't escape a day without seeing climate change in the press. Global warming is becoming a big issue. Temperatures are rising. We've got a little image there that shows the polar ice caps and the difference between September 1984 and 2016 that came from NASA. And you can see the reduction is changing absolutely massively. Alongside that, we're seeing natural disasters such as flooding, and this isn't just in some remote countries around the world. This is actually impacting people such as yourselves now, where people are having to be evacuated from their homes, and it's all a result of climate change. And then last year, there was the really horrific fires in California, which devastated a lot of America there within that. So on this note, the IPCC have been producing reports now. The 6th report was actually published in April this year. Sadly, because of everything that's been going on in the world with the war in Ukraine, I think it didn't quite get the media coverage that it perhaps required. But the report came with some stark findings. So at the moment, we're currently at 1.1 degrees C warming. Throughout the past timeline since this has been measured. The Paris Agreement itself was actually implemented a few years back. The whole aim of that was to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees C. People that may be not aware, after 1.5 degrees Celsius of increase, some of these changes, even now actually at 1.1, are irreversible, but it would see catastrophic impact globally. There'll be a lot of people that will be dispositioned by this. There'll be parts of the world that are completely uninhabitable, and these disasters that we're seeing, such as flooding, fires, and so forth, are only going to become more and more common and more severe. The key things from the IPCC report itself, though, is I think myself, I found the measurements from the sort of best case scenario, mid case scenario, worst case scenarios findings that they found reported that actually the 1.5 degrees C and keeping that alive, which was widely published at COP26 last year, might be missed. If we look at the best case scenario there, by 2040, they're expecting this 1.5 degrees C to be hit. Worst case, it's going to be 1.7. And then for the following decades after that, it's only going to continue to increase until decarbonisation in particular starts to have some impact. Worst case scenario, we're looking at by 2100, 4.4 degrees C increase, which would be catastrophic and would see many, many species become extinct. And obviously, we don't want to get to that. Backing that up, we've got some stats here from NASA. If we look at the solar irradiance from the sun, we've got the actual Earth's temperature versus what the solar irradiance has been doing. So global warming, particularly through the Industrial Revolution, has started to massively ramp up the temperature. You can see that the sun itself, this isn't something that's cyclic, and it's being caused by outside factors that stay quite constant, but the temperature of the planet, the red line, has actually started to increase massively, which backs up those findings from the IPCC report. That said, when it comes to carbon emissions, which are one of the obviously the largest contributors to the warming effect, 40% of these typically come from the built environment. So as a sector, we need to address this drastically, and we need to do things now. There's been a lot of change around regulations, and approved document L has been updated. That's due to be released very soon, and that's asking for all new homes to produce 31% less CO2 emissions than what's currently acceptable within the current regulations. There was also proposed document Z, but as we can see here, if you take a look at the .gov website, that bill's actually been withdrawn. What that was planning to do was to enforce embodied carbon measurements within all new developments, and it's quite sad that that isn't going ahead as planned, which links into some of the other positive actions that are going on. So last year at COP26, the UK Green Building Council announced that they were launching their net zero whole life carbon roadmap. There is some fantastic bits that you can download and take a look at on the UK GBC website on this, particularly stakeholder summaries, policymaker summaries, where they're really pushing to get people to measure, notably for specifiers, to make sure that you're measuring the carbon impact of your projects, and for manufacturers and suppliers of construction materials to make sure that you're measuring what your business is doing from an operational point of view, as well as noting the performance criteria for the materials as well that go into the projects. Mbs ourselves have been considering sustainability within the platforms for quite some time, and it's something that we're ramping up efforts on and continuing developing these. You can see here within the specification tool, something simple like considering timber sourcing within a spec can be quite easily done. In this particular example, the specification is going to be requiring FSC certs for the timber flooring that's going in. Once that's been established, the clause drops in, and then through the products that are available, the specifier can actually go and select the products that meet this criteria. So we're looking at a dark oak engineered walnut floor here from the solid wood flooring company, and if we drop to third-party certifications, you can see that they've got FSC certificates, and it's 100% guaranteed there. So that can be dropped into the specification quite easily, so helping the specifiers make those sustainable decisions on the projects. Within MBS Source as well, we're pushing manufacturers quite heavily to list their sustainability credentials, and this is something that we actually work with Chetwoods on establishing the criteria. So we're asking for things like embodied carbon emissions, country of manufacture, country of material origin, red list materials, that kind of thing. Within the descriptions, we're engaging with the manufacturers to ask for information around what the products contain, as we've just seen there. But if we scroll down to the actual specification data, you can see that we've got information here relating to the recycled content of the products, and then the performance criteria as well. So if we look at the U value here under thermal conductivity, you can see that if we change between the options, the U value is changing as well. So we're structuring that information, and then we're asking for those different criteria to be surfaced at the bottom to allow better decision making. Now, one sort of barrier that we are facing is that not all manufacturers seem to have this information, even though we're pushing for it. So we would really encourage manufacturers to consider this. If you want to know more, please chat to us. But it's just a general take on where the industry is. So with all that said, that there's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of things that were unknown, and this is what sparked the reason behind wanting to conduct the report. So at MBS, we wanted to understand what the industry's perception of sustainability was, and importantly, so we could share that information with the industry to gain a broad picture of where things are, what the industry was then doing in terms of improving, and what barriers were actually being faced in the real world. So we hear many reports being discussed, and the government talking about things. I was only on a call this morning where we were listening to Alok Sharma discussing what had happened in the 6 months since COP26. So what's actually happening in our sector particularly, what things were good, what things were bad, and how did people see future progressing in terms of sustainability within the construction sector. There was a lot more, but I don't want to go into too much of those because I'm going to hand you over to my colleague Jenny, who's going to give a very in-depth overview of the report findings. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for listening to me, and I'd like to pass you over to Jenny to discuss the Sustainable Futures report. Over to you, Jenny.
Okay. Thanks, Lee. Hi, I'm Jenny Archer. I was the lead researcher on this project, and today I'm just planning on spending 10 to 15 minutes just to give you a brief overview of the findings. So I want to start with a brief background to our approach. We ran an online survey between September and December last year, inviting both specifiers and suppliers to share their views. Partners supported us by promoting the survey to their members, and for each completed survey, we committed to planting a tree through forest carbon. We had a great response with over 600 people completing the survey, meaning we've arranged for 608 trees to be planted at Doddington North in Northumberland. Before we get into the full results, I want to give a brief overview of who responded. Around 3/4 of respondents described their project role as consultants, but the other main project roles were represented, and a wide range of professional disciplines responded. Nearly 1/3 were architects. Others included BIM specialists, architectural technologists, and marketing specialists, among others. When asked about the type of work they do, 85% of respondents tell us they work on new build projects, in particular new build private housing and education. 2/3 work on deep retrofit projects, particularly offices, and 6 out of 10 carry out light refurbishment, often of offices and private housing. Now we move on to the results, and I want to start by looking at what the term sustainability means to the construction industry. When we asked respondents to describe it in their own words, there was considerable variation about the elements of sustainability they emphasised, but there were some common themes. Very broadly, many consider sustainability to be about striking a balance between the resources used and the welfare of the environment. Some expand on that, emphasising the need to protect the environment for future generations, including some mentioning the official definition of sustainable development coined in 1987 in the Brundtland Report. But there is scepticism. Some question whether it exists, or if it does, whether anything can be done to stop climate change, while others see it as a buzzword. As part of their 2030 climate challenge, the RIBA defined a set of 8 sustainable outcomes, which you can see here. We asked respondents to rank these to help us understand their relative importance to respondents and the projects that they work on. Net zero operational carbon was ranked as most important, closely followed by good health and well-being and sustainable land use and biodiversity. But the high scores show that all of the RIBA sustainable outcomes are important. We move on to consider what and who influences a project's sustainability credentials and an organisation's approach to sustainability. We asked respondents to consider how important sustainability is to them personally, their organisation's executive or leadership team, and the organisation as a whole. Respondents' personal views are particularly important. 8 out of 10 tell us it's very important to them personally, with a further 18% saying it's quite important. but just 4 out of 10 think that it's very important to either their executive or leadership team or to their organisation as a whole. In any research, it is expected that those with definitive views on a topic, whether they're positive or negative, will be more likely to respond to research about that topic. Respondents' interest in sustainability may help to explain some of this gap between the importance to them personally and the topic's perceived importance to their wider organisation. Looking at why respondents personally consider sustainability in more detail, the primary reason is their own personal beliefs and values, followed by a desire to lead by example with sustainability. Compared to 2014, the industry is less driven by legislation and the views of other people. The reduction in the influence of legislation is perhaps not surprising when you consider that in recent years, the government has dropped some initiatives such as the Code for Sustainable Homes. So how committed are companies to sustainability? Well, overall, they seem to be demonstrating a commitment. 3 out of 4 respondents tell us sustainability is a board-level agenda item, so many are discussing it regularly. And many measure and report on sustainability metrics for the projects they're working on, with 38% doing that for most projects and 42% for some. In terms of their own carbon footprint, just over half tell us their company measures it at least annually, but only a few do that monthly or more often. Your larger organisations are more likely to say they measure their carbon footprint. But fewer tell us their company offsets carbon. 38% do that at least annually. Offsetting carbon is more common among larger companies, and those doing light refurbishment who perhaps find it more difficult to incorporate sustainability into their designs. It's clear from respondents' comments that there is some scepticism around the value of offsetting carbon. We wanted to explore the level of influence that the main project roles have over whether sustainable outcomes are achieved on a project. It's clear that respondents see clients as having the largest influence. They set out the brief for the project, including their sustainable performance requirements, and later in the project can ensure that value engineering won't impact on these. But respondents also see the designers or consultants having an influence. They're responsible for designing something that meets the brief. And if sustainability isn't mentioned by the client, they can discuss it with them. Perhaps they just haven't thought about it or hold some of the misconceptions around sustainability. So what gets in the way of achieving it? Well, we asked respondents to identify the 3 main barriers they experience to delivering sustainability. Just over half of respondents cite lack of client demand and the cost of achieving sustainability as the main issues. Almost 4 out of 10 also highlight sustainable products being value engineered out, especially suppliers, and a lack of government policy and regulation. Your contractors are more likely to view contractual risk as a barrier, not really a surprise in a construction landscape where material shortages are an issue. Next, we'll look more generally at how respondents' views and approaches to sustainability compare. Using the RIBA plan of work stages, we asked respondents when sustainability is typically considered and when it should ideally be considered. The purple bars show when respondents typically consider sustainability. You can see that just over a third typically consider it at stage 0. That then gradually increases with over half considering it at stages 2 and 3, before starting to tail off, reducing significantly from stage 5, when only around a quarter typically consider it. Looking at the blue bars, you can see that in an ideal world, respondents, in particular clients, would start to consider sustainability earlier. Nearly 8 out of 10 respondents would ideally consider it at stage 0. Over half think it should continue to be considered during stages 1 and 2. And 4 out of 10 respondents think it should continue to be considered throughout the project timeline between stages 3 and 7. We wanted to explore whether there was any variation between the sustainability metrics that suppliers choose to publish about their products and what information users of product information are mainly looking for. Here you can see the top 5 sustainability metrics selected by each group, with supplier selection shown in purple and the users, such as your consultants and contractors, shown in blue. You can see that there is a lot of overlap in the type of information provided and needed, but the order of priority is different. whilst users of product information see product level certification as particularly important. That only appears at number 4 in the information that suppliers offer. Similarly, at number 2 in users list is information on embodied carbon. That's something suppliers provide, but not as regularly, meaning it falls outside of their top 5. Suppliers providing this information will help users when they're comparing and specifying sustainable products. So how else can users of product information be supported in meeting sustainable outcomes, and what other processes do they follow? Well, users of product information would like more suppliers to provide sustainability performance information. 92% agreed with that statement. And 9 out of 10 also agree that having a robust specification is important to achieving sustainable outcomes. In the latest survey, just under half of respondents tell us that they're confident in their knowledge and skills of sustainability, but only 1 in 10 are very confident. And you can see that these confidence levels have remained largely the same over time. The confidence levels have an impact on both the processes followed and whether sustainability is ultimately achieved. Respondents' comments suggest that more education on the subject would help them to feel more confident. We turn to look at how often sustainability targets are set and achieved. In the last 12 months, 7 out of 10 respondents have worked on projects that had sustainable outcome targets at least some of the time, but only 14% had these targets all the time. We also wanted to look at how often projects have been net zero. Fewer respondents have worked on such projects. Only 4% tell us all of their projects have been net zero in the last 12 months, and over half have never worked on one in that time. Only a third of respondents tell us that they usually achieve sustainability. They're less likely to be those that are working on the light refurbishment projects. Compared to our previous sustainability surveys, fewer are now telling us that they achieve sustainability on the projects they're working on. A particular challenge for the industry is the sustainability of existing buildings. 9 out of 10 agree that the government should do more to help make these net zero. Having said that, nearly 3/4 are positive about the future. 73% agree that home working has reduced their company's carbon footprint, and 72% believe that the built environment will become more sustainable year on year. But despite that, 74% of respondents tell us they are frustrated that they can't do more to make the UK achieve sustainability. It's evident that respondents are becoming increasingly frustrated about what is and isn't in their control when it comes to the subject. That likely reflects the importance of sustainability to respondents, as well as them having a greater understanding of the challenge that climate change presents. The UK and many other countries have set targets to achieve net zero. In the UK, that's to reach net zero emissions by 2050. We asked respondents to predict when they would become net zero. Amongst those who chose to make a prediction, the most common answer was between 2026 and 2030, when 30% predict that they'll become net zero. Concerningly, 1 in 10 think they'll never be net zero, and a further 5% think they'll only achieve that after the 2050 target. So what does the future hold? Well, we asked respondents to consider what they think the next big thing in sustainable architecture will be. Many referred to the circular economy and the need to consider and spend more time recycling and reusing existing building stock instead of building everything new. Some retrofitting and repurposing of existing buildings is already being done, but the industry isn't seeing it happen often enough yet. Another key element is the development of sustainable products and technology, especially those that can be used as alternatives to heavy polluting products. And many also highlight the need to develop alternative heating and energy sources. I just want to leave you with a few closing thoughts. It's clear that people hold strong personal views about sustainability, which drives them to deliver sustainable outcomes. Compared to 2014, they are less driven by legislation or the views of others. There is a general consensus that clients have the largest influence on sustainability, followed by designers or consultants. But there are barriers to achieving it. Only half tell us that they're confident in their sustainability knowledge and skills. Feeling confident helps ensure targets are set, relevant processes are followed, and sustainable outcomes are achieved. Respondents highlight the main barriers as being a lack of client demand and the perceived cost of achieving sustainability. Others also mention issues with sustainable products being value engineered out and a lack of government policy or regulation. There are also issues with the processes followed. Sustainability needs to be considered earlier at stage 0 and continue to be considered throughout the project's timeline. To help overcome some of the barriers, respondents would like to see more education on sustainability, which in turn will help to improve their confidence in the subject. And 9 out of 10 would also like more suppliers to provide sustainable performance information about their products. Looking to the future, becoming net zero is something that many are working on, and 30% predict that they'll achieve this between 2026 and 2030, but 15% tell us they'll miss the government's 2050 target. It's clear that construction professionals feel a need to consider the circular economy, focusing on reuse and recycling of existing buildings rather than building new each time. There's also a need to look into the development of new innovative sustainable products and technology, as well as alternative heating and energy sources. I've only had time to give you a brief overview of the findings. There is more detail available in the full report, so if you haven't already done so, please do visit our website to download it. And now I'll pass you back to Lee.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, thanks for giving us your time. It's really great to get people that are obviously known in the industry for this type of subject. So I think without further ado, let's get straight into it. So my first question is aimed at Jade and Talene, and I think that there's been a lot of focus on achievements by 2030, and like the RIBA climate challenge focuses on making achievements by 2030. Scarily, it's only 8 years away. So in your opinion, what do you think is the most fundamental aspect within construction that needs to change or be addressed if we're going to make the most significant reductions in emissions over the next 8 years? And I think, Jade, jump me to go to you first on this one, and then we'll go to Talene afterwards.
Yeah, happy to. I'm going to cheat a little bit though, because I don't think there is a silver bullet. There isn't one thing that you kind of hang your hat on that's going to solve all of this, unfortunately. I think if there was, we'd have done it by now. Yeah. But there's a number of things that we do need. And I think the most important thing, if you ask industry, is long-term joined up and effective government policy. That would really help us to kind of plan things. But also from the industry side, industry need to make this a priority and stop kind of avoiding it and hoping it will go away, because it isn't going anywhere. You can see that now. But we also need good consumer awareness, so that they're demanding things. We need the knowledge and skills in the industry. Quality and performance has got to improve so that we can give confidence to the people that we're carrying out the work for. And innovation was mentioned in the report as well. We need to be better at adopting innovation and new methods if we're going to change and deliver the 2050 target. So apologies for the cheat, but there's a whole host of things we need to do, summarised in that response.
Great. And Talene, is that something you agree with, or have you got a different view on this at all?
I very much agree that there's no one answer for sure. But I guess from the architect's perspective, perhaps, some of the things that we need to focus strongly on is overall building reduction of energy, so building energy use, transition of primary energy fuel from fossil fuels to renewables. Unfortunately, this year we've seen a significant step backwards where governments and companies globally are answering the stop of oil supply from Russia as an excuse to exponentially increase drilling instead of putting investment and resources towards improving the renewable energy supply infrastructure. We need to consider embodied carbon. I know you mentioned that Part Z is not going forward, unfortunately, but from the UK government level, we need to see regulation on embodied carbon come through immediately. Without regulation, huge energy monster constructions will continue to be built, unfortunately. So while we do see a lot of personal I guess, need for sustainability in the report, we're also seeing that a lot of companies, there's a mismatch between personal values and company value and then action. So that's something that we need to address very quickly.
Great. I think obviously the operational energy side of things is something, Jade, that you guys, obviously that's your bag, it's what you focus on. If somebody wants to know more about this, is this something they can find at the SEA website? And if so, have you got any details you could share with that, just to where people could go to look?
This is the tricky point. There isn't a one-stop shop with everything available for the industry. We are working on something at the moment that we can share in terms of what our members can do and where people can go. But if consumers can go to things like the Energy Saving Trust website, there's information on there. We've got members like the BRE, they've got lots of information. The Active Building Centre, who do a lot in terms of the different technologies. So unfortunately, it's all in individual places at the moment. Right. But we're stressing the need for a one-stop shop to bring all this together and provide that independent place to go for information.
Sure, thank you very much. And yeah, on this sort of similar vein, Jade, when we were looking at the RIBA sustainable outcome topics in the report, it found that net zero embodied carbon ranked 4th behind net zero operational carbon. There was good health and well-being and sustainable land use, etc., behind that. But whilst it's ranked higher than others, such as sustainable life cycle cost, do you agree with the positioning of this? And how can we make embodied carbon a higher priority for new build and refurbishment, I suppose?
Yeah, I can't say I'm surprised with the results, just because of the approach being taken at the moment. And to some extent, I kind of agree with the order. I think there's a few things in there, though. With embodied carbon, there are certain products that need some long-term research and development, like things like embodied carbon in concrete, and that means that they need to get started on it now. But there's another argument as well, and what I'm seeing in the sector is that instead of dealing with operational carbon, some companies are pushing it down the supply chain and trying to avoid dealing with in-use carbon and using embodied carbon as a game playing tool, and I don't want that to happen. So I think that the right outcome is to look at whole life carbon, look at everything together and make some informed decisions on the project. That's what I would be advocating for.
Sure, I think that's something I'd agree with. I think if you look at the UK Green Building Council report, I know they are pushing for VAT sort of lifts on refurbishment to reduce things like, you say, concrete. There's a lot that needs to be considered, but I think it just goes to show that we've got to do a lot more than we're doing now. So yeah, thanks for that. Absolutely. Trying to keep everybody involved, it's always a juggle when we've got more than one or two people on the call. So I'm going to go to Jenny next, but this question is going to be open to everybody. When considering sustainability, obviously reducing emissions is a critical consideration, but what about social sustainability and other areas of ESG? Do you think that emissions focus might detract from these? Jenny, obviously you conducted the report. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think from the report, at least some people do recognise the importance of the other aspects, such as social sustainability. So when people were given their definitions, some referred to the triple bottom line, and many did indicate that social sustainability is important, but not as many who thought that environmental or economic sustainability was important. And it was clear when we asked about some misconceptions that one of the things people identified was people solely focusing on some aspects, or just focusing on the carbon. Yeah. So I think it is natural that some aspects of sustainability will be more important to some projects, but you can't forget about the other ones completely. You do need to take it all on board.
I think that might allude nicely to Talene. Then obviously as an architect, you've got to factor in all of this when you're designing. What are your thoughts on that, Talene?
Yeah, I really do advocate for a holistic approach to design, so that we include all three pillars of sustainability: the economic, social, and the environmental, of course, which, the emissions discussion is often the one that leads centered, basically. But the UN Sustainable Development Goals do inform global policy, and they include all of those elements. So a lot of companies should be looking to those if they're not already, and incorporating the UN SDGs into their policy as well. But from the social and human and biodiversity elements that are often missed in these emissions discussions, we are really missing a major part of the puzzle. The social aspect is crucial. The infrastructural inequalities that are pervasive throughout most societies that are either willingly or unwillingly shaped by Western values and systems are a real issue. And already those who have contributed least to the climate crisis are the ones experiencing the consequences. So we need to listen to Indigenous groups and leaders who are actively protecting remaining biodiverse areas to inform our policies and our practices. We also need to listen to and give a platform to marginalized groups who are seeing their landscapes destroyed by unsustainable forestry, agriculture, and mining practices. But then also just, I know this is the MBS, so just looking to the material supply chain. As an architect, I want to know about the supply chain and have a bit of transparency into that. I want to know that the materials that we're specifying have not been produced with slave labor, for example, and we need material suppliers to really interrogate their own supply chain to ensure that that is not something that is an issue in their own supply chain. And then if it is, to amend it, because we don't want to build something at the cost or have a cheap material at the cost of human life.
No, absolutely paramount. And I think it's something that we've mentioned in quite a few articles and webinars and things before, is that people such as yourself, you're looking at what that business is doing and how they're operating, not just what the products do. I think for any manufacturer suppliers that might be listening, yeah, take note, because it's something that is coming from the coalface of people requiring that. Jade, just quickly, do you have anything to add on that one?
Yeah, fully agree. And I think that, the key missing piece for me is health and well-being. If we focus solely on carbon, then you can end up with unintended consequences. And we've seen this in the past with projects where we've fully focused on putting insulation in for the energy efficiency and not thought about mold, moisture, overheating, and some of those unintended consequences that can happen if you just singly focus on carbon. Also, it's a real missed opportunity. If we're going to be retrofitting buildings for carbon, why not retrofit to improve health and well-being and think about the other elements of the buildings that can be improved as well? So absolutely, we're not focusing enough on the people side. Just focusing on carbon is not going to help.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I think it might be worth noting as well that some of the things can go in tandem. So if you look at things like passive measures and natural daylighting can help well-being just by providing natural daylight, but obviously can lower the energy consumption of a building just through not requiring electricity provision for a longer period of time than it might have done before. So yeah, completely agree with everybody and appreciate your thoughts on that. Moving on to what personal beliefs were in the report, and I'm going to go to Jenny first on this one. Personal beliefs ranked highest by an absolute country mile when it came to people stating why they consider sustainability on projects. But on the flip side of that, worryingly, legislation and company policies were really, really low down on the list. Do you think there's a reason for that, or do you have any thoughts to share with the audience on that one?
Yeah, between the last survey in 2014 and obviously the latest one, there's a lot that has changed around sustainability legislation. So, for example, the Code for Sustainable Homes being removed. So I don't think it's really a surprise that legislation has dropped down the list. And so far this year, there have already been some government announcements. So most recently reference to sustainability in the Queen's speech in Parliament. So I think we would hope that you might to start seeing improvement in the influence of legislation and how important that is. Having said that, without the company support and then prioritising sustainability, I think it is going to be difficult for individuals to drive sustainability forward on their own. I think they do need that company support as well.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, Talene, as a specifier, what's your thought on that? Obviously, it's something that you are one of the decision makers. Have you got any considerations to put forward?
I will say I'm very active politically in terms of this, but at the Architects Climate Action Network, where we lobby against we lobby for better government regulation and for practice action. But then just generally on that topic, it's just very striking to see that sustainability is very high on the individual's personal agendas, but that their perception or the reality is that the company leadership and organizations are not valuing sustainability at the same level. I think that's going to cause a lot of friction between employees and employers potentially. But while this conversation has been happening for a very long time in the smaller sustainability related circles, I think that this really highlights that people are realizing that mitigating the effects of climate crisis on their personal, community, and environment's health does not jive with the idea of constant growth at the business level and generally the business as usual practices. So I do think that there is a societal kind of shift in consciousness or change of thinking in terms of how we're relating to the climate crisis versus what's happening on the economic side and business side. So unfortunately, I mean, speaking from the US perspective, obviously in the UK, but I am American by background. Unfortunately, there are many government policies and politicians that are influenced and lobbied by big business interests. And if on a society level, the majority of us have bought into this idea of the linear economy with continuous growth, this is then in conflict, especially with big business lobbying government policy. It's in conflict with our need to draw down the impact on environment and social impact.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think people that make these decisions, if we can change our mindset, I suppose it's going to help change the mindset of those companies and obviously the knock-on effect of the government. It's a big rabbit hole, doesn't it? It really is. The further you dive into it, the more that you find as linked and connected and influencing things. I think staying with you, Talene, on the next one, when we were looking at the number of projects where sustainability is measured, only 38% reported that it was done for most projects and 42% for some. As an architectural practice, Chetwood's obviously you push a lot of boundaries when it comes to sustainability. Is there any advice that you could give to other practices on the benefits or pitfalls of conducting measurements on those projects?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say speak to the client at the very start of the project, perhaps even before a project is a project, about what the targets they want to set are and continue to revisit those, the progress towards these at every discussion. But then we want to set our own architectural practice targets as well for sustainability within the practice operations and individual projects, ensure that we're holding ourselves accountable and reaching those. But then we also need to make sure the general office leadership of the practice is on board with that message, as well as the individual project leaders and directors. And just as a reference for people that are looking for further information, there's a really wonderful series on right now that's hosted by the Architects Declare and ACAN in partnership with REBA, called the Practice Action Masterclass, which aims to provide architecture professionals with the practical skills and confidence to pursue more sustainable and regenerative practice models. It's interactive, it's got a lecture portion, it's got a discussion portion. So I really recommend following along with that. And I'll actually be speaking on that in August as well. But in general, if you're not wanting to do the masterclass, the Architects Climate Action Network continuously hosts wonderful lectures and events, in addition to thematic meetings on climate literacy, circular economy, biodiversity, etc. And anyone can join, even if you're not an architect. And it's a great place to meet others interested in the same, to share resources and learn for free. So I would start there. Excellent.
Have you got a web address for people to take a look at in the first part?
Yes, I'll put it in the chat here.
Excellent. Thanks very much. So yeah, I mean, opening the floor to everybody when it comes to company measuring, reducing and offsetting their own emissions, there is a notable lack of it happening across the industry. That there are a lot of businesses that are doing this, so we can't dismiss it completely, but it's the minority and not the majority. MBS, we've been doing this. It's something I've led now dating back to 2019, and we've been reporting, we've got a reduction plan, we've been offsetting. Is there something that you think all businesses should be doing, and what impact benefits do you think it could bring to a company? And is there any advice you could give? I think, Jade, can I go to you on this one first? We've not heard you for a while.
Yeah, no, it's right. I think this really depends on the sector you're in. Yeah. What I'm seeing on the ground is that the infrastructure side are starting to measure and do a lot more in terms of their own carbon emissions, but also on a project by project basis. Now, this is heavily being driven by governments who are using procurement rules to change the way things work. So on infrastructure, they're a little bit further ahead. Then when you kind of look at housing and retrofit, the companies there aren't doing a lot at all. And there's a few kind of forward-thinking, sustainable organisations, but many aren't. I think everyone does need to play a role. And, you know, we need standard sort of metrics for people to share across the industry and a place to keep all this information, which I know the industry is starting to develop, but probably not quite there yet.
Sure. Jenny, anything from yourself on this one?
I think some of what you were seeing in the report is that some respondents are a bit skeptical about the value of offsetting carbon, with some people citing it as a bit of a misconception. So, for example, one respondent described the single biggest misconception as thinking that it's okay to just offset carbon by buying things rather than working to make sure that the building has lower embodied carbon in the first place. I think offsetting carbon can have benefits as long as other steps are also being done to look at other things such as the embodied carbon. It's not an issue of you do one or the other. I think they both have to work together, and maybe some more education around how the two can work together would help.
Talene, your views on this, please?
I have to admit, I do have a bit of skepticism around offsetting. We don't know, well, I think in the UK, it's a bit of a better program than it is in the US. But in the US, we've seen double counting of planting of trees, for example. So I'm very skeptical. On the other hand, I do think it's very, very important to measure and reduce the carbon emissions from a company. But then in lieu of just sending off money to perhaps pay off the difference between the low embodied carbon material and then trying to reach net zero. Of course, it's wonderful to support our local initiatives for improving biodiversity and planting and forestry practices, but also we can spend a lot of investment and capital in like social sustainability, investing in local, yes, like, I don't know, job training, invest in our own employees so that they have really good sustainability training so that things are being baked into the company rather than performing the action and then kind of paying off the rest and missing that educational portion. I think there are a lot of things that can be done to support our local economies, that instead of sending off money to a faraway place for trees to be planted where we don't know if it's being done well or not, we can see some very direct benefits by investing in our local communities.
For sure. I mean, MBS ourselves, we signed up to the UN's Climate Neutral Now scheme at the beginning of last year, and that does provide the clear sort of indication of measure, reduce before you look at offsetting. And I think that's probably a fundamental thing that people need to get. Offsetting, personally, I think it is a good thing, but as you mentioned, it should only be done as a last resort. I think it was Jenny that noted that it's something that isn't a get out of jail free card. I suppose it's something that we need to do to complement the other things that we're doing to reduce. Talene and Jenny, again, the client seen as the largest contributor to whether a project has to define sustainable outcomes or not. A second stat that we saw in the report showed a lack of client demand. As with many things, it's not necessarily the client's area of expertise when it comes to things like sustainability or even building safety, for example. So how do we shift the onus further up the stream, say to the designer or the contractor, or do we just need more education and legislation around this to make the clients sit up and take notice, really? I think I'd like to go to Talene first on this one, and then to Jenny, please.
Sure. Unfortunately, we can't all go back to school or university to retrain with the climate crisis as the lens through which we're learning our professions or trades. Luckily, I had the opportunity to do that, but I know that it's very privileged. But I mean, this goes for clients, architects, contractors, etc. But in lieu of this, and this is a bit controversial for some architects, but I see it as the responsibility of the architect or the sustainability consultant, perhaps, to educate clients at the very start of the project. Something that we do or my job entails is that we are running a lot of workshops with the entire value chain. So that would be the client, the contractor, manufacturers, material suppliers for the project, all the consultants involved, and kind of doing a crash course in what it means for climate literacy, net zero, what considerations are there in terms of social sustainability for material selection, for example, water usage. So we do spend a lot of time doing that. And then hopefully what that means then, if we use it on one trial project, and then it's baked into the company policy for the future, it's baked into their base specification, and then that moves forward and continues to improve. So we're really heavy on the educational knowledge sharing CPD section in terms of what I'm doing at Chetwoods. But then separately, as companies and individuals, we also very much need to recognize it's everyone's responsibility to act and to take it upon ourselves to learn more. That doesn't necessarily mean reading a textbook. It could be going to some really wonderful exhibitions, watching documentaries, traveling, having a conversation, engaging on social media. I'll just give a quick shout out to the really nice exhibition on at the Barbican right now called Our Time on Earth. That's a wonderful one to just get stuck into to learn a bit more.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to forget that there's actually physical things that people can go and see. So yeah, thanks for that. Jenny, have you got any thoughts on this? Obviously, the stats were compiled by yourself. Do you have any sort of insight you could share with the listeners?
Yeah, I think some similar thoughts to Talene. The designers obviously came out as having the second highest influence, so we probably aren't doing too badly there, but the support of their company will help, for example, making it sort of standard policy that they raise the sustainable performance requirements and discuss the relevant pros and cons with the client right at the beginning. But all of the rules do need to work together to deliver sustainability. So the client needs to establish the performance they want. The designer needs to design something that will meet those. And then the contractor needs to ensure that any of the changes that they might need to make or products that they still need to specify, they need to make sure something that they choose will contribute to that performance. And that can all be helped by the supplier making sure they're providing the performance information that those people need so that they can make those comparisons and making sure that they can provide what is needed in terms of sustainability. And I think I do keep saying it, but more education can help around the longer term cost savings and that can be made even if the initial cost is higher to the client.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think from what I've gained from that is obviously everything's interlinked. It's not just one answer, but I thought it was quite crucial there that you mentioned about the policies of the businesses that were doing it, having that sort of top-down approach. Yeah, great that it links into that. But if people can address these things, I think we should see some positive changes. On the educational side, Jade, from your experience, is increased education necessary across all sectors, or are some performing better than others? I know you just mentioned about the infrastructure sector outperforming some of the others at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need increased education right the way across the piece. We recognise there's skills and knowledge gaps across all the sectors and all areas, and it's not just in the construction side as well. It's in sort of social housing, local authorities, you know, all the client side as well as the industry, so that we can deliver this. And for me, you know, we need a workforce that's capable of designing, of building, and retrofitting holistically. So we're looking at energy efficiency, low carbon heating, broader health and well-being, broader sustainability across the piece. And that's going to need a huge shift in people's knowledge and understanding. As I said, there are differences in the sector. The client side are being pushed. Government procurement rules mean that they have to look at procuring for value. The construction playbook's about to be refreshed and come out again soon. That will have a focus on net zero this time around, and really start to drive change. And that's where we're seeing the changes at the client side and infrastructure side. But we need to get to housing and retrofit, and we need to make changes there.
Definitely. I think that brings me on nicely to the next question, actually. Obviously, optimizing energy demand on any project during the in-use phase is a high priority. However, if the project's a refurbishment, what practical sort of considerations or advice could you suggest as being the most significant thing to consider when embarking on refurbishment? I think that question is probably a bit broad, so if somebody has any opinions on that, I'm more than willing to listen to anybody that wants to respond.
Yeah, happy to chip in on that one, Lee. I think firstly, take a fabric first approach. You know, we need to put energy efficiency first and stop wasting heat and energy in the first place. There's then going to be need to look at the heating system itself and move towards low carbon heating. Electrification is coming through strongly from governments looking at heat pumps, but there are other technologies out there and ways of decarbonising heating that can be looked at as well. I'd definitely say take a holistic approach to decarbonising, thinking about broader health and well-being. So for me, if you're doing retrofit, looking at having a retrofit coordinator, a competently trained one, or a good project leader that understands the impact of the measures that they're installing on that particular build and the interaction of those measures is going to be absolutely key. So we need a good quality plan. We've been pushing for a long time for something like a building passport that sits with the property, that gives more details on what the homeowner can do, and almost like a delivery plan as well on what the right measures for that particular property to minimise unintended consequences.
Thanks very much, Jade. I think my camera's just gone off slightly. Hang on a minute. Is it back? Yep, there we go. So there's the joys of these things. No, I think that's great. Talene or Jenny, any thoughts from yourselves on that?
I can jump in. Yeah, I fully support Jade's comments. I think in terms of the delivery of that, I really support the EnerFit process or framework. And as a passive house designer myself, I do think that is a good route to go, because then you have to include considerations for moisture content. You're looking at the envelope itself, how we're ventilating. So the health and well-being portion is crucial in this aspect, but of course, we're providing good insulation. But from a practical level also, we need to be doing thermal imaging of the buildings that are existing, so we can identify the areas where there's air leakage or thermal bridges, for example. We need to be doing air leakage tests. So we're doing blower door fan testing to ensure that the building is nice and tight, while also ensuring there's the good ventilation for good indoor air quality and things like that. So those are quite important. But also within that, actually, we need to be considering material health as a very important part of that, because as we seal up our buildings to make sure that energy is not being lost to the outside, that also means that volatile organic compounds are staying within our building. So we need to be very specific about which products we're choosing for our retrofit materials, and also which furnishings and finishes and cleaning products we're using, because we don't want those VOCs trapped in our environment and impacting our health.
Sure. I think going back to the days when I was a product manufacturer, I think that's something maybe where the US actually had an edge on this with LEED. A lot of the projects that we supplied to on that, VOCs were absolutely critical in lowering. And I know that was a panel manufacturer that I worked for at the time. Urea formaldehyde, for example, within chipboard was big on the agenda of eradicating. So yeah, a lot to consider there, and appreciate that. Jenny, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to move on to the next one. Obviously, I do understand that there's a lot that we could talk about, but staying with Talene just for the moment, the report that Jenny demonstrated showed a disconnect between what specifiers seem as a priority when it regards information on products and what manufacturers thought that specifiers actually needed. Is there any advice that you could give to manufacturers, suppliers of products and materials if they're looking to gain more specs through the sustainable credentials?
Yeah, I generally think it's very difficult to rank the importance of product information because it's on a project by project basis, depends on the project aims, the company aims, and the project context to kind of set the agenda. But for example, if you're looking to achieve materials with high recycled content, then that would be your jumping off point. If you want to look at solely healthy materials with no VOCs, you're looking for product level certification that shows material content and highlights red list or REACH chemicals inside of the material, or the lack of, for example. I don't know if we should necessarily be ranking material data, but what we do need is full transparency for robust certification that includes all these elements and more, so that we can make the right decision for the right project.
Sure. I think with the red list thing in particular, it was surprising the amount of suppliers that we spoke to that weren't aware of the red list itself. I think on that note, is there a place where you could point people to if they were curious about red list materials and what that is and what they can do?
Absolutely. The Living Futures Institute has a list online of the red list items, so I can put that in the chat. But I will say that there are fewer things on the red list than there are on the REACH chemicals. That is provided, a list provided by the EU, which is actually going to be beefed up a bit this year. The EU is increasing I guess, I don't know, legislation and prevention of, hazardous chemicals from entering the market at all in Europe. I don't know where we are in the UK. I think that I might have recently heard about a step backwards since we're no longer in the EU. So I'm not sure what that is, but I think both looking at the REACH list as well as the red list are important.
Perfect. And then I've got one more question for Jenny, and then I'll wrap up with some comments. Jenny, when we look at the stats that show how often sustainability is achieved on projects, there seems to be a decline and not an increases, which is what you'd expect. Do you think there's any reasons behind this when we look at the past reports versus this current one that MBS have done?
Yeah, I think that was a finding that did surprise me a lot initially. And unfortunately, further research would be needed to fully explain that. But I think you can hypothesize that it can be connected to the removal of legislation in recent years. So a lot of the aspects about sustainability are now something that's voluntary for people to do rather than mandated. And I think also that the industry now probably has a better understanding of sustainability, the challenge of lowering carbon emissions and what that presents, and generally what's required to achieve sustainable outcomes. So I think it's all of those things combined that are probably contributing to that drop.
Cool. Yeah, I think it all seems to be coming back to education, doesn't it? It's just people's awareness generally. I think you probably will see that dip as people become more aware of what sustainability is. Hopefully it'll increase in the next one. Yeah, so just to close then, within the report itself, we asked respondents to state whether they agreed or disagreed with certain statements. So I'm going to list what some of those are and ask each of you what your thoughts are on that. So firstly, with Jade, we asked respondents to state whether they disagreed or agreed with this statement. It's the government should offer more support to help existing buildings be made net zero. What are your thoughts on that? Do you agree, disagree?
I absolutely agree. I think we do need more from government. And as I said earlier, we need that long-term joined up thinking coming through. But not just for net zero, we need to really start thinking about wider sustainability and in particular health and well-being, where there seems to be a void in policy at the moment. What we need is a national retrofit strategy in particular. That's the tricky piece, which needs to be done in collaboration with industry. We need more money. There's a lot of people that can't afford to do this, living in shocking housing up and down the UK. Yeah. Fuel poverty with the current climate is only likely to increase. And we need drivers. We need things to push those that can pay to do more. As we said already, there's a severe lack of awareness when it comes to on the consumer side on what to do and what it's all about. So a kind of joined up government-led awareness campaign is needed, and that independent advice, like where do you go to do this, that's kind of linked together, needs that government piece to make it fully independent and to pull it all together. But industry can't just pass it all on to government. And if you ask industry, do they want government to do more? They'll always say yes. We need to play our part too. It's going to need all of us to deliver net zero.
Completely agree. Completely. Jenny, the built environment will become more sustainable year on year. Do you agree with this? And should we start to see the decline in projects achieving sustainability rising as people become more aware, or do you think that we'll see a continued decline in these stats as education is rolled out?
We'd certainly hope that you would start to see it becoming more sustainable year on year, and it will be something that will be interesting to monitor in future surveys to see if it actually does. There is, of course, the risk that once people understand it a bit more and what's involved, that it will decline further. But I'd hope to see that curve would flatten out quite quickly and then start to improve, particularly if we see more legislation help drive towards net zero. And additionally, I think it should help if companies are able to support their employees' sustainability aspirations, and that should help to continue that drive forwards and improvement as well.
Cool, thank you. And Talene, this is very sort of architecture specific, I suppose. BIM makes it easier to complete sustainability processes and calculations. We asked the respondents to agree or disagree with that. Have you got thoughts on that topic?
I very much agree with that. With bidirectional integrations between BIM and tools like one-click LCA, for example, we can very quickly calculate buildings' embodied carbon. We're able to use modeling to do evidence-based design, so we can designed with minimal or no overheating whatsoever, designed to good daylight levels indoors. But then also with the information stored in a BIM model, we can capture material data that allows us to, in the future, effectively evaluate and dismantle materials for reuse at a building's or building components end of life to support the circular economy. So there are a lot of good things with BIM that I support.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And then finally, to wrap up, I'm just going to open the floor to everybody. I'll maybe start with Jenny and then go to you, Talene, and maybe close with Jade. What do you think the next big thing's going to be in sustainable architecture? Jenny, your view?
I think I would largely agree with respondents that improving technology such as the batteries and looking at alternative energy sources really has to be quite a priority. And I think we've already mentioned that many of the buildings that will be here in 2050 are already here. So I think we really do need to look at the retrofit and refurbishment of those buildings and how we can ensure that they reach that net zero somehow.
Great. Talene?
Yeah, I agree. Retrofitting and refurbishment is very important on the list. Also transitioning to a circular economy. So very happy to hear that the government is considering the taxation issue with refurbishment versus new build, because that is a major barrier. And then also this is social sustainability aspect. We need to make sure that the people who are designing our built environment are as I guess diverse as the people who are using it. So we're supporting it from every angle.
Brilliant. And finally, last but not least, Jade, your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm not an architect, but I have got a view on it. Decarbonising our heating is going to be a must. Retrofit, absolutely agree. That's the kind of key challenge we're all facing at the moment and needs to be addressed. We've been trying for a number of years and not kind of found the solution yet, which we need to work on. And health and well-being is the missing piece. Think about designing buildings to optimise people's health and not cause unintended consequences through what we're doing on zero carbon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. On behalf of MBS, I'd just like to thank all of you for giving your time to do this today. It's been fascinating sitting and listening to sort of specialists in this area to give their responses, as well as reviewing what people had said in the report that Jenny did. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much and wish you a pleasant day.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, so we've seen the rationale behind why MBS conducted the report. We've heard firsthand from Jenny that wrote the report as to what the findings were, and then we've obviously got the fantastic insights from the panel. So just to wrap up and summarize before we let everybody get on with their day, just want to run through a quick few takeaways from this. So we've realized that sustainability isn't just one specialism's responsibility to resolve. We've all got to do more to reduce global warming potential in both the projects that we work on, but also importantly how we conduct business, and that covers all areas of ESG. As professionals, though, we shouldn't dismiss the fact that we are relied upon, so we need to lead. So when we are making decisions or we are giving consultancy to clients or anybody else that's in the value chain, we need to be leading with this. Notably from the report as well, sustainability must be considered early in any project. The earlier that we can consider this, particularly at stage 0, for example, of the RABA planner work, the more likelihood there is of the sustainable outcomes being delivered at the end. Sustainability isn't just a bolt-on, it's something that needs to be factored in through a whole project's lifetime. And then relating to the obstacle of cost that was picked up in the report, if we can design this in from the start, costs will become less of an obstacle as we can plan for this, even if it's down to simple things like passive measures. It doesn't necessarily always have to be about the materials that go in or the operational emissions. They could be factors that are led from how the thing is designed in the beginning. And I think last but not least, it's clear that, yes, while regulation is an important driver and it will dictate how people have to conduct things, we can't sit and wait for regulations to change. The political landscape has been uncertain for some time, but we know what we need to do. So please take this as a call to action to discuss with your leadership within your business or within your own projects. Consider sustainability, and together we can make the change that we need to do. On that note, I'd like to thank everybody for listening. Hope you found it useful. Please check the mbs.com events page for future webinars that we've got coming up. There's a whole host of different information on this topic that we've delivered previously and that we're going to be delivering moving into the future. If there's anything that you'd like to know about MBS, or if you're curious about the Mbs platforms, if you are a specifier, please visit the mbs.com or drop us an email, at the mbs.com. And if you're a construction product manufacturer, supplier, for example, of products, materials, or systems, again, you can visit the mbs.com. We do have a dedicated manufacturers area within that section, and we also have a dedicated email address that you could drop a note to, which is manufacturers@thembs.com. My name's Lee Jones, and I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd like to thank the panel for giving their time today, and on that note, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.